Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of The More Show. Now today's show is going to be a little bit different. I'm about to be interviewed by another host called Ryder Lee. Now Ryder hosts a podcast called Raised by Giants, and he's going to take the lead in this interview. Now we're going to discuss all things in regards to the work I'm doing now, and of course my upcoming docu-series Captain Mark Richards: A Murder in Camelot. Just going to play two quick clips just before we start the show, and then we'll play the sort of full-length versions within the show as well. What you're about to hear is an interview I did with a guy called Keith Andrews. Keith worked for Mark Richards back in the day in 1982 when the murder took place of Richard Baldwin, and then we're going to hear a short clip from Mark's brother-in-law, Joe. And you'll just hear Joe describing the time when Mark Richards stole his brother-in-law's contract license. And then we'll get straight into the show with Ryder Lee. And just thank you for watching. What was it like working for Mark? How many construction crews did he have working for him?
As far as I knew, two. And Gary and I were one crew, and then Crossy, and I don't remember the other guy's name, were the other crew. As if nothing had happened. And they said, you know, don't, if he offers you to go out on his boat again, don't go. If he asks you to come to his house, aside from picking up supplies, don't go. And we'll have somebody, you know, at the job site.
So the cops were building up a picture way before they arrested them. They knew what was going on.
They had a body, and I don't know whether they linked the body to him. I have no idea. All I know is that when I told them where the body was, they said that they had just found a body that day.
And then it was sometime later, I get a call from somebody else asking me if I was Joseph Morena, asking me if I had Joseph's cabinets, and I said yes to both. And he quoted my contractor's license number, and I said, yes, that's me. And then he asked if I knew Mark Richards. Well, apparently he had contracted for Mark to do a roofing job on him, and my license numbers was on the contract. And that's when I found out it was true that he was using it. So that's when Mark and I ended any sort of relations, either through being my brother-in-law or the business.
Hello and welcome back to Raised by Giants, where we talk all things spirituality. I'm Ryder Lee. Tonight we have special guest, the host and producer of The More Show, Kevin Moore. But before I introduce him, Raised by Giants is on ROKFIN. Go over there, set up a ROKFIN account. I release one premium video over there a week, and it is less than a YouTube premium account, and you'll get all of my premium content when it gets released and all of the other creators' premium content as well. Click the link in the description to sign up for the video streaming platform ROKFIN. Also, if you would like to make a donation to help the channel grow and produce more content, you can donate on PayPal or buy me a coffee to help support my work. It is 100% completely optional and is unfortunately the only alternative other than monetizing. And we know what happens to channels like this when monetization gets involved. And I want to keep this channel, and I like being here. So if you guys can donate, I'd very much appreciate it. No donation is too small. And thanks to everyone that's donated so far. I appreciate all of you so much for your kind and generous donation. Click the link in the description for donation options. Thank you. So without further ado, introducing tonight's guest, Kevin Moore from The More Show. Presented and produced by Kevin Moore, provides the platform from which some of the world's greatest philosophers, paranormal researchers, life coaches, spiritual teachers, and authors can communicate their work, research, observations, reflections, and infuse them into our common knowledge. Their understanding of life and the universe, The More Show, will be reaching this ever-growing group of people searching for a deeper understanding of their lives and the universe. Kevin, my friend, thanks so much for coming on. Excited to speak with you. How are you doing?
Ryder, it's fantastic to join you. Thank you so much for the invitation. And today I'm doing good, man. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your time here this evening. Before we get into all the craziness, the convoluted story of Captain Mark Richards, which is a wild and crazy story, trust me, I want to kind of get into your background a little bit and what kind of got you started down this path of interviewing channelers and spiritual teachers on your show?
That's a good question. Well, just sticking with the channelers right now, it started out right interviewing channelers. It was going to be a channeling docu-series, and before I was, getting close to putting that docu-series together, it just seemed so daunting, right? I didn't know where to start with it, and it just felt like it wasn't meant to be a docu-series in the end, right? As in a sort of documentary or even a sort of, episodic kind of series of shows, right? And I just decided in the end just to release them as an ongoing, interview style docu-series. And I guess part of me got a bit addicted to wanting to get it to just over 100 episodes, and we're on 115, well, probably 116 now. I think everything happens for a reason, right? I think the progression of it is these channelers will be eventually, some of them will come to contribute towards the International Spiritual News Network, which I'm setting up, the ISNN. So I'm moving next year, at the very end of next year, over to news. And it'll be, reporting the news as is, but also looking at the deeper karmic reasons behind the news. I was going to say spiritual reasons behind the news, but it means all that. I don't exactly know how it's going to end up, right? All I know is right now, I'm building the website, the isnn.com. It's there, and it's many months away from being finished yet. And everything I do is going to be under the ISNN. So I'm going to need channelers. I'm going to need psychics. And I've also got a readers platform, which I'm just building as well, called channeling.com. So channeling.com is going to be, it's going to be a go-to resource for all things channeling, right? But to begin with, I built it up as a sort of readers platform, and that's sort of one business that I've been working on for a while to get that up and running. But regardless how that does or what the outcome's going to be of that, I see the channelers coming in with the news, and I see myself starting a docu-series called They Call Us Psychics, which is there to sort of help the channeling.com, but it's also there because I want to start building some connections with people for the news network as well, right? That news network came to me in it was supposed to be a regression, but it ended up as a progression. So this is back in 2016. I was living in Holland, and a guy came on that who's now passed away. His name was Hank Jones, and he pestered me, pushed me, to want to try out his alternative method of QHHT, and I did, and I ended up in 2023, 2025, and some other years as well, where I got to see this news network that I set up. But I don't think it was the only thing that I was doing, but I can feel the pull for that right now, but I don't think it's going to be the only sort of purpose I've got, if that makes sense. So
were
yeah.
you interested in channeling before you? Were you interested in channeling before you started the show?
I was. Well, not before I started the show. Had you asked me what channeling was when I started the show, I wouldn't have had a Scooby-Doo, right? I wouldn't have had a clue. But I actually started the show because I enjoyed Coast to Coast, and I want to restart the More Show back up again, not too long. Maybe sometime in late August, because I haven't really been doing that many shows for the More Show, and I need to sort of get back to doing that as well. My focus has been on docu-series and Captain Mark Richards, and just getting a few bits of groundwork prepared just to get into that space of other projects that I've got going on right now. So my time's just, I'm working all the time right now, to be honest with you. There's a lot going on.
So is the website that you're going to put together, the network news website, is that going to replace your show on YouTube,
Yeah.
the More Show, or are you going to do them congruently?
Well, the More Show will be a show on the network, so we'll be taking other people's show. We would eventually be making our own content away from the More Show. So the channeling docu-series will eventually... some of the legacy shows will stay there, but they'll probably move away maybe as well. But the More Show will stay, and I mean, news networks, they don't just carry news nowadays. They do all sorts of content. So I'm probably going to go in that direction where, it's a bit more of a content production platform. But I'm sort of pushing myself in that direction, even in now, just starting to change my social media names and, just putting everything over to the Iceland to eventually get to this place. There are some days that I think, what am I doing? And there's other days that it all makes sense with the way that the world is right now. So, I don't have to do it, but I feel cool to do it. And after, I actually got to revisit some of the progression session that I had, because I wanted to play it back not too long ago, and I actually found clips that were on the Regressionists YouTube channel that were my reaction straight after coming out of that progression, and I'd forgotten a lot of what I said because I never got to see some of these clips. I'm going to put them all together in one video soon and just release it onto my channel. But it was interesting. It talked about, that the world is going to go, was going to go through a great change, and the change, I don't know, it feels like it's starting now a little bit. I mean, it's been going on for a long time. Many people have predicted this change, and you could say that, in times gone, that change has always been talked about, but I think there's something special about this time right now.
Was it a positive change or a negative change that if you can recall?
I do recall it, and it wasn't a negative change, but things had changed. Now, the world was still there, but I can't explain it. All I know that I didn't get to see too far ahead, but I know that either change had happened, change was happening, and I think it was a positive thing. And I keep getting told that by the channelers as well, that yes, it's going to be bumpy, but this is something that we've got to go through, whatever this is. So no, I don't think it's fearful, but I'm sure things could get bumpy along the way. That's probably the most peaceful way to say it. Do you know what I mean?
I think so too. And speaking of channelers, you've interviewed a lot of them. Is there anyone that really sticks out in your mind as being like 100% legit? Like almost everything that they were saying, you were like, damn, that sounds really like straight up real to me, because we know how some channelers, you don't, it's a weird thing with channelers. You don't really know what's going on because it can't be verified. It's just kind of, they're just saying these things. But I have an open mind, and I'm willing to listen to anyone. But is there a certain channeler, maybe a few of them that you've interviewed that you've been like, yes, this person is 100% legit?
I think that there's a number I could point out to say that, actually. And most of the good ones, if not all of them, will not sort of predict the future too much. It's really about you becoming your best version of yourself, that all the power lies within the present moment. And if you want, regardless of what change is going on in the world, even if it's quite a difficult change, right, that the only way forward is to change yourself. And how much of a ripple effect that really has, unbeknown to us, to other people. And to come from that space of being your best version, of living your purpose, no matter what that is, right, and being true to yourself, and so many good, like, philosophy type of information. It's not really, it's a very fine line sometimes between the medium and the channeler in some respects, right? But then it's not thinking about it. And I think gifts vary so much that it's all a form of channeling in some way. It's all you getting out of the way and letting the message come through. And a good medium will do that. But they may not understand that that's the process that they're doing. They're really, channeling their higher self. They're channeling that person's higher self. They're, I mean, of course, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly in any field, right? And I've seen and I've experienced channelers that, and very few, but some that manipulate people. Manipulate people to a point where, they're ending up in bed with them. Do you know what I mean? and that's very few and far between, right? But it's like anything. There's good builders and there's bad builders, or there's in any field. But this is a very sensitive field. I get that, but normally, I would say a good majority of the channels that I've had on. The funny thing is, it's the same message coming through right now. Do you know that? That's they're all saying the same thing, and it really is. Again, I'll repeat it. It's that message of by changing yourself and being true to yourself and living in purpose and all these beautiful quality things that I could say here, but I want to give the time back to yourself as well. That it can only come through sometimes for a person that wants that change, or is looking for is going through an awakening or whatever they're going through. That channeler that's coming into their life at that moment is the right person to help them in a sense. And I suppose you could say that for many types of readers as well. But we seem to resonate with different people, with different different. Well, okay, let's stick with channelers, different channelers sometimes. But I'm just trying to think, God, there's a few that's sort of blowing my socks off or blowing my mind in some respects. When some of them, it's amazing where you could go sort of into the idea of beyond the current understanding of the nature of reality. And I've had a few conversations with whatever this energy is that's coming through them. And that was wild on some of them, how deep they can go. If you're ready to sort of really twist your brain and actually wanting to go beyond what you think you can do. But is it that useful? Probably not, because I think we've all got things in this present moment we're trying to heal, aren't we? Well, not heal. I hate that word sometimes, right? But whatever it is that's going on our journey right now is what we're after answers for sometimes, if we're going that far to go to someone with gifts. But I do tend to think that all answers lie within, and that we can all channel our higher self. And I think that's part of, I would hope, or I like to try to make that part of the message of the channeling docu-series, that actually you can do this yourself in a sense.
Do you think that that's what most channelers are actually channeling, is their higher self? Because if your higher self lives on a different level of reality, they would know a lot of information, right? I believe that we have an infinite data field all around us. And if they're in a different density, a different reality, then that data would be more accessible to them. So do you think that that's what it is? I mean, I'm sure that some people may actually be channeling different entities or entities outside themselves. But from my observations, I think that a lot of the channelers are actually channeling their higher self, and they may just not know it.
Yeah, I think we like to give names to whatever this is, right? Sometimes this energy that comes through people with that ability to open up to that space. And I do, I would agree that a lot are channeling their higher selves. But then there's others I've met that there's something else coming through, and one is Paul. I'm going to get the name wrong here, but I think it's Paul Selly or Selick. Sorry if I've got the name wrong. And he used to live in New York. He now lives in Hawaii, and I found his way of channeling fascinating, and he brings the guides through, and they were good. They were really it was deeper than Paul. Paul fights it all the time. Do you know what I mean? And it was weird to see that interaction, but then when this energy came through, it was like, well, there's something else here right now. One of the really good. Sorry, go ahead.
It's kind of like a fine line between channeling and in a sort of like a possession, almost, you would think, because if the being isn't completely acclimated with you, then the words that's coming through is going to be half of your words, and then half of the words that's trying to be channeled through. So I would be guessing that if you were to get the full affect and actually get the words that is trying to be translated. Because from my understanding, some of these entities, they don't, their language isn't our language, so they struggle to actually find the words, and they can only use the words of the vocabulary that the person that they're channeling through has in their mind. I don't know if that's the way that you understand it either. So there can be maybe some
Absolutely.
misinterpretations of the words sometimes.
I think that happens a lot. I think a lot of good channelers will say that's what happens. Paul's getting in the way, or or Karen's getting in the way, or whatever it may be, right? And I think that happens quite a bit. I think there's a human aspect of this. Of course, there is, right? We're all human, and but does it really dilute the message that much? I think when the ego gets involved for some of them that have ego issues, I think definitely, right. But I think it's a funny thing, right, to put yourself on stage to want to be a channeler. You've got to really, really feel that that's your truth to do, haven't you? I mean, you've got to worked on a lot about yourself, I think, to come out and do that work, because it's very much on the fringe. So I think those that have come and done the work and are doing it and have stayed for the long term, that says a lot. And I think when it's off as well. You just know when it's off. And sometimes I think for some people, I think they hear what they need to hear because that's what they need to hear. So, if someone's going to tell you, you're doing great work, what you're doing, misleading people, keep going, we're so proud of you, and that's the message you're getting, then maybe there's a deeper reason for that message. And I know that sounds so silly saying that, because most people will say, well, no, that's just the person that's channeling that, and it has no gift. But I don't know. I don't think it's as black and white as we think, or even understand it to be.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And have you made any connections to the paranormal side of this, and how this, because you're mentioning earlier how the mediumship and the channeling is connected, and there's a fine line between them. Have you drawn any conclusions or thoughts and ideas about how the paranormal phenomenon might be connected to the channeling, and then the channeling connected to some kind of ET presence, maybe? Because that's what I believe. I believe that all of it is connected, and it's only our perception of it that's separating it, right? Like if you were to bring a UFO researcher into a haunted place, they would say that it was aliens, right? If you brought a paranormal investigator into a haunted place, they would say that it's paranormal. We've liked to categorize this phenomena and put it into certain boxes, when I don't think that it's that black and white. I think that there's a lot of connections that we have absolutely no idea about.
Yeah, I would totally agree that what we think we know, and all the great books out there, and people's truths or people's understanding of what they think they know, which is wonderful stuff, we barely have scratched the surface on what this really is, right? And there's probably a good reason for that, because we're supposed to get on with this, right? What we're doing right now, yeah. With that sort of carrot dangling there, that there's something greater to maybe guide us in whatever direction that sort of, if we do look into that space, what that does for us, right? We're not supposed to know, are we? We would know otherwise, right? And yes, and I think the veil is so thin, right? So thin. And as you say, all these, the Bigfoot stuff, as you say, the UFO research, the channeling, the mediumship, of course, it's all coming from the same energy in a sense. Or, I'm sure there is life out there, and maybe an evolved being has an understanding of a few thousand years more than us, has had time to think about these things, and or maybe they're still the same understanding as us, is that there is something, but but maybe that being thousands of years ahead of where we are consciously, that maybe they've surrendered to that space more than what we feel is so important, to us, even where we're all at collectively, a lot of us. So yeah, and even in our worst of times, do and even if we are very, we say that we're open to the ideas of a greater understanding, and we've maybe spoken to a lot of teachers and whoever in this field, does it make it easier when you're going through the crap, in whatever situation that you may be facing? Not always. I mean, I can't say I always employ, or I always go to that space of, all the people that I've interviewed. Has it made my pain any easier? No. But have I then practiced anything I've been told, of these people I've spoken to? I think that sometimes I guess I'm a glutton for punishment, and the pain's got to be quite high, right? But I think as I get a bit older, I am a bit more trusting in flowing and not trying to work it all out. And I think trying to find a happy space, and what that is for myself. And I think that's the process I'm going through right now. It's like, what is it I want to do in my life? I know I can't believe I'm saying that, but I think it's true. Yes, I know I want to do the ISNM, but I feel there's just a few other things that I might want to do that might balance it out. So
Absolutely, I agree. I had a theory one time on the paranormal, that the paranormal entities or the beings that we might see as paranormal is actually us trying to communicate with us, because I believe that we live in a multi-dimensional reality, and there's many different parallel realities that are on top of ours, right? Like I think that it's all kind of like stacked, and it all runs parallel, and there's a very thin veil that's separating all of these different parallel realities. And maybe because normally paranormal events are individualized to the specific person, so it's very rare that there's a group paranormal event. So then why is that event tailored specifically to that individual? It could be because that's like them in some kind of different parallel reality, and there's like an overlay, right? Because I don't believe that time runs linear. I think that it's all happening here and now, and there's I didn't come up with that myself. That's just many people have talked about that, but I think that that's the way that it is, that the past, present, and future is all happening right now. And there's like maybe past lives aren't even necessarily past lives. Maybe they're all happening right now, and it's just in a parallel world or in a parallel reality where these things are living out. And
that's what a lot of the channelers tell me, that all past lives are happening now. And so many channelers talked about the idea of the parallel universe, and how almost that I've tried to what I'm going to put in words right now, right? It's difficult to put into words, but kind of what they were saying, a lot of them were, when we go to sleep, right? And if we're shifting towards manifesting a certain direction for ourselves, that, we're actually, the soul's leaving that particular body and going to another parallel reality that's a little bit closer to where we need to be. And everything almost seems the same. But in that version of the parallel reality, you're going to be closer to where you need to be. And then you get closer and closer. So as you start manifesting, you're actually soul jumping in a sense, but you're completely unaware of it. And until you get to that destination, things have got to that destination, or maybe you've jumped there to get there quicker. They didn't say it like that. They said that you're constantly jumping to different realities that are just a tiny bit different. And I'm just using the analogy of sleep.
Maybe that's maybe what the Mandela effect is. Maybe it's not so much things, people messing with time and going back and purposely changing things. Maybe it's just us slipping into a parallel reality where things are very similar but not the same.
Right. And would it even matter if it was true or wasn't true? It's interesting. But I think what it does, maybe it breaks your thinking free, in the sense that you can pretty much, manifest most of anything that you want. You've just got to be really sure to yourself of, why you really want it. And they always say, don't they, go with the feeling of having it, and how would it feel like? And if it feels like everything, that it just feels like, a choice of love, go for it. And if it shifts a little bit, that's okay as well, because what you're going to end up with is something better than what you thought was best for you. Maybe I do feel that the soul is in charge quite a bit here, and I think in the experiences that I've gone through recently, I think that if there was one way of explaining it, of something that's pushing you, and you don't feel in charge sometimes, maybe it's your soul that's pushing you, and it just knows what's best for you, and you've just got to go through this and just trust it.
Then, like, well, if there's near-death experiences too, and I've looked into near-death experiences as well, and like walk-ins. I know, I'm sure you're familiar with the walk-ins, but normally when people have like a near-death experience, they tend to come back different, right? They don't come back the same kind of person that they were, whether that was, maybe they wanted to better their life, they realized that they weren't doing something right in the past, and then it's like some people have claimed that they're a completely different person. So maybe that was a different soul coming into this human avatar, and the soul that was there, or the consciousness that was there, because I think that the soul and the consciousness is connected. The soul is the basis of the consciousness, and they're basically the same thing. We've just kind of separated them, but you can't live without a consciousness. The consciousness is what makes us function as in this 3D physical avatar that we have. But I think that the near-death experience thing is really interesting, that it almost seems like a kind of walk-in scenario.
It does a bit, doesn't it, when you think about it? And there's so many wonderful and really interesting and fascinating near-death experiences, and it's happening all the time, isn't it? I mean, it just doesn't stop. There's so many probably new cases that are out there that have not, become public yet. But I know there's some fascinating near-death experiences, and as you say, it's very close to the walk-in as well. I've interviewed a couple of people that say they're walk-ins, and they know they are. Obviously, that's what they've come on to talk about, or they feel that they are. And when the walk-in situation happened, they become they changed their relationship, or they became single or they've lost the house, they've lost everything, and what was important to them. Well, they don't lose it straight away. This is over time once they've made major, but they've come. Well, I wouldn't say loss is the right word. Maybe what I'm trying to say is they've walked away from it. They walked away from what they thought was really important to them, and they've gone on a different type of journey. Could that be a walk-in? It could well be. There's some fascinating and interesting aspects of the paranormal. I mean, I've been doing these types of shows for many years right now, and I think I got to a point where I just needed a bit of a break. Do you know what I mean? Or I felt that something else was pulling me in a sense, and I think we're all on different paths, and sometimes, as I keep saying this in the interview, don't I? You've got to trust that path. You've got to let go. But I think whichever way I'm going forward. Well, I know the one thing I'm doing, which is the ISNM, but I know everything I've done has sort of served me to get to that point, if that makes sense. We're all doing this for, we think we're doing it for one reason, but sometimes it could turn out to be a very different reason.
Yeah, then also with finding legit people to bring on your show is becoming more and more difficult. It's becoming a harder thing to book people, but I kind of like what you do on your show though, Kevin, because like I think that if the channeling information is good information, it's not harmful information, it's not telling people to kill people, or you know what I mean, or spreading any kind of hate or anything like that, then that's okay in my book. As long as it's positive and uplifting, then like I have absolutely no problem with channelers.
Yeah, I've tried to keep it like that with the channels that I get on. I haven't really met that many that have come from the opposing opinion, opposite to that. Really, I mean, most of them, if not nearly all of them, come from that space. So, but I hear you. I mean, that it's easy to get sucked into the sort of conspiracy stuff, and what's trending out there, what's popular. I, you know, I based Coast to Coast on when I was into it quite a bit back in the day. It's what inspired us to do the show I'm doing, I thought the majority of guests that they used to have on and still do have on, and like yourself, a good guess. But I think it's so easy, isn't it, nowadays? There's so much more of conspiracy kind of shows out there in a sense, and then they sort of mix the spirituality in there as well, and it becomes a real foggy path for some people that are just getting on this path. When you've got the spiritual mixed in with the spirituality, so a conspiracy mixed in with the spirituality. I call it conspirituality. And it's very different nowadays.
It's a good term.
Yeah, it's a term. Yeah,
it is, and it seems like that they've really exaggerated this whole thing, and they've made it really big and spectacular. So the more unbelievable your story is, the more people cling on to it. So I think that this is a really good point to kind of transition into your docuseries. So about Captain Mark Richards. So tie in how this developed with your show and how you got onto this Captain Mark Richards story, and how this all kind of shaped and molded into this docuseries that you are creating.
Well, it's really weird when I think about it, right? That actually, speaking to you right now reminds me of some of the reasons why I started it, actually, because I think at the time I was at Contact in the Desert in 2018, and I was interviewing other channelers, and Contact in the Desert was on. One of my UK friends was over there as well, so I was like, hey, you know what, let's go. And he actually had backstage passes, actually, because he was doing some of the media stuff there. He actually runs a large Awaken and Aware conference in the UK. He's like one of the bigger conference organizers for that kind of stuff. And I remember being backstage there, and just meeting David Wilcock and meeting some other people there, and I thought, oh my God, what a load of rubbish it all is, and how bigger sort of egos these big presenters have, right? And but it wasn't just that. I was at a time when there was the build up of QAnon was going on, and we have Project Camelot there, that it had there was so many people out there that were raising red flags in the community and stuff, and still do even to now, and even people like Simon Parks and other organizations, that it just seemed that there was a lot of misinformation, really. And I guess I never thought I'd be launching Mark Richards docuseries as a sort of as part of my new platform, which is the ISNN, as we've mentioned. So yeah, I just lost a lot of heart. I lost a lot of just passion as well for the industry that I was in, and just seeing just a lot of people misusing their audiences. Maybe that's a better way to say it. And then the Mark Richards story landed on my lap, where Kerry Cassidy had from Project Camelot had been her number one whistleblower, and he still is her number one whistleblower. She released a book not too long ago, which is a good portion of it was based on Mark Richards, or as he goes by, Captain Mark Richards, but he's not a captain. And when I had met another person had come my way, we sort of bumped into each other because he contacted me after hearing his name mentioned or him mentioned as a person on an interview that I was doing with Kerry Cassidy, and this guy had approached us to say, "Look, this guy, Captain Mark Richards, it's all a fraud, don't you?" And then I met this guy, and he shared some information, and it sparked my interest big time. And when I got back to the UK, because this all took place in America, so Captain Mark Richards, is Kerry Cassidy's top whistleblower, and he's a guy that's been in prison for now 40 years. And says he was framed by the deep state for his time that he spent as an astronaut and part of the secret space program. Him and his father worked together in the secret space program. This guy goes by Captain Mark Richards, and he was the intel drops for Kerry. So obviously, when I started looking into the Mark Richards story and realized that this guy had never served in the military, he had committed a murder in 1982, which Kerry and Mark's wife, Joanne Richards, and anyone that supports Mark Richards, they don't want to talk about the murder. We don't talk about that because it's got nothing to do with what's going on now. Well, it's got everything to do with it, because if he did commit that murder, that was part of organizing a murder back in 1982, how can he be trusted in 2022, right? Well, of course he can't. So 4 years later, almost 5 now, I've been working on this docuseries, which is which will expose the truth on, and most people know the truth because I've done a lot of videos on this. But I'm looking at it. It's going to be like a true crime meets the secret space program docuseries. So I'm looking at a market outside of the UFO community, but it will be released for the UFO community as well. But you don't get many true crime meets the secret space program. It's really unusual, and I know that you've done some research on it, and it is, as I said in other interviews, so convoluted to even understand where to start for this. Some people watch this and they'll just switch off because I don't understand it. Well, yeah, it's knowing where to start from. So I don't know if you've got anything you want to ask.
It is really convoluted, and there's a lot of different moving parts, and I admit it is very, there's a lot of things going on with it, and I've researched into the documents that you've sent me, but I think that it's important to kind of set up for the people that might not know who Captain Mark Richards is, what he was kind of claiming was going on, because from my understanding, this murder that he was associated with was, I believe, July 6th of 1982. And then when did he start coming out that he was a part of this secret space program and these black budget projects? And how were you wanting to interview him in the beginning after you had interviewed Kerry Cassidy, and that's why you were looking into him and researching him, or how did that work?
Yeah. So he came out in sometime in 2004 when he convinced his wife at the time, who had married him just a couple of years before that, or 2002, I think they got married. And don't quote me, because obviously in the docuseries all the dates will be correct. And when they first got married, he promised. Well, he basically told her that he didn't think he was going to be long and he'll be out. Well, if she'd done a fact checking, he's obviously a life without parole, and he has very little chance of getting out unless he's going to admit to his part in the murder of Richard Baldwin, his good friend, that he orchestrated the murder. He was there when the murder took place. He got a young 17-year-old called Crossan Hoover to stab to death, brutally murder with a baseball bat and a knife and a few other tools at Mr. Baldwin's classic car restoration shop in San Rafael in 1982. He convinced Crossy, who had learning difficulties and anger issues, and came from a bit of a difficult upbringing, which will come clear in the docuseries because I've interviewed him for over 3 months, a bit more than that actually. I'll also visit him in prison, and I basically approached his wife, Joanne Richards, to do a docuseries when I'd come away from Kerry Cassidy. I mean, I'm missing chunks out here, but I'd met Kerry Cassidy, realized there was a docu-series here, and it wasn't just an interview. And when I approached Joanne Richards in 2018, everything was fine as long as we didn't touch upon the murder. And if I was going to touch upon the murder, then at least, get Mark's take on it as well. Well, of course, when she spoke to Mark about what I was doing, he comes up with these stories that, his lawyers have told him not to talk and he won't be talking. And it's just nonsense. He doesn't have any lawyers. There's no way for Mark to get out of prison unless he gets his sentence commutated and by the California government or governor, by doing that, he's got to admit to his part in what he did, and they've also got to think he's worthy.
So how
of
did
that.
he get so prominent in the UFO community?
Yeah.
That was this through Joanne Richards, his wife, that
That's
he
right.
married in prison,
Yes.
correct? And then Kerry Cassidy came along. How long after he was involved with?
She came along about 2012. About 2012, Joanne was introduced to. It's around that time, 2012. Joanne was introduced to Kerry Cassidy by Lorien Fenton. Lorien Fenton is another enabler of Joanne Richards. She feels that she knows people in San Rafael that have contacts, whatever that means, that know that Mark was framed. There's a few enablers that do not allow or do not help Joanne to see the truth, because this is it's her heart that's taken her on her journey, and her soul as well. And she comes from a Mormon background as well, so the whole UFO side of things in the Mormon religion's there as well. So there's many aspects to this, like I said. So yes, Kerry Cassidy meets Joanne Richards. That first interview is still available on the Project Camelot website, and then after that interview, maybe a year later or whenever it was, then she starts visiting Mark in prison. And as she says, she's not a journalist. Her intuition told her that this man was telling the truth. You can't trust court testimony because it's doctored, and this man is innocent. Well, Mark is a master manipulator, and he's a disease of the mind as well. And when a disease of the mind like Mark Richards gets into vulnerable people's heads, and they see the dollar signs because there's a niche in the market for it, then it's a beautiful concoction. Then, especially it was for Kerry Cassidy. So where she'll stand in all this when the docu-series comes out, I hope it does show some people that were following this story quite big back in the day that they were, that just because she's got a big platform does not mean that she was telling you the truth, that she would ever. I mean, she told me she would never look into them. She's looked into the murder, but it's not for her to publish or to talk about the opposing opinion to the Mark Richards story, which I think is crazy.
I heard your guys'.
Oh, you did, Chichi.
I heard your guys'.
Yes.
The phone call between you and Kerry on Terry Joyce's
yes
channel.
Yes,
that was incredible. She was like, you were like, well, why don't you come out with the opposing side of it? She was like, well, I don't need to do that. It was I was actually laughing the entire time, not at you. I was just laughing at the whole scenario, because it's not very often that people really get confronted about the nonsense that they put out, which is really unfortunate, because I really liked Project Camelot. I had been watching her since 2012. She's had some really solid interviews, apart from this whole going to the prison and taking a baby notepad and a short pencil, and sometimes not even being able to get a pencil or a pen and paper.
I tell you why that is, because California is one particular state where you're not allowed to interview inmates with electronic equipment. You've really got to be a big network, and the warden's got to see the wardens basically got to say yes to it, and it's really the big networks that will get that access, and even then it's maybe a no. So absolutely, I mean, other prisons throughout the US, other states, yes, a lot of them you can interview them, you can bring recording equipment in. It's all got to be obviously prearranged and everything else, right? But California's completely shut down when it comes to that. So yeah, she would have only been allowed a pencil, and that would have been given to her when inside, and sometimes not even that. That's true. So, and then she does what's called total recall. I mean, you could call it something else, total BS, right? But it's not just her. There's many other platforms where, just like her, they're doing the same thing. And I'll use the word Simon Parks. I mean, he came to the rescue of Mark Richards to say that he had. Well, he now says he's working for the U.S. Navy. Well, he's English, right? Like me. He's not even in America. He's in England. I mean, it's just insane to believe these lies that people tell. And their followers love them so much that they'll follow them, right? I mean, they don't want to question them, or they why would this person lie? He's got a British accent. He talks so well. He comes across as loving and caring and stuff. And you just know the information's nonsense. But then there's, like I said before, there's a lot of people that have gone on the Qatar train and have gone down that direction, which is really sad. And look at the effects right now.
Yeah, that was a huge explosion.
Yeah,
that was like a huge. I felt like that was a huge bandwagon, because
absolutely.
all of a sudden, during 2020, like everyone was just like jumping on the train, and I never got caught up in it. I mean, I thought some of it was interesting, but nothing more than that. I never believed any of the things that they were talking about. I was like, okay, well, I'll just put it in the back of my mind, maybe for some kind of reference.
Well, that's the direction that Kerry Cassidy's gone. I mean, that's where she's gone. And
which is unfortunate, Kevin, because like I said earlier, she had some really good interviews in the beginning, like with William Tompkins. I believe William Tompkins was a very legit experiencer. He worked for the Navy.
Well, she also interviewed Bill Brockrader, and do you remember him from Project Looking Glass?
The name sounds familiar, but I can't place it. She's put out so much content that it's hard to
Bill
keep up with.
Brockrader served many years in federal prison for raping his wife's family member, and that family member's come forward on a TV show right now with John Walsh to tell her story of what he did to her as a little girl. And she gave that platform to Bill Brockrader, and she gave a platform to Jim Fetzer. I mean, if you're watching the Alex Jones trial right now, Jim Fetzer's name keeps coming up quite a bit as the crazy, insane person not to be believed, and a guy that claimed that Sandy Hook was an inside job. I mean, she's has so many. I think for Kerry, as long as they've got a criminal record, then the more believable they are. It seems to be. They've got a criminal record, they're fine. But that's got to be questioned sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely, in some kind of vetting process. But sometimes I do play, devil's advocate with it, because I mean,
sure,
she had Bob Dean on there. Bob Dean, I believe, is a very legitimate person. It was like a bunch of her earlier work, with Ashiana Dean and people like that. And there's a lot of people that reference those old videos a lot, and I tend to sometimes reference them too, because there was a lot of legit and real information in some of those older videos. But yeah, you're right. Whenever she started jumping on the whole Q train, I just kind of fell off, and then she lost her channel, and then she started doing her on her website and stuff. But I haven't watched any of her stuff in a long time. But I mean, I have to play devil's advocate and say that some of her earlier works were really good, and I did very much enjoy them.
Well, she's vetted 107 now, the JFK guy who's been shown to be not who he says he is, and actually has had his, many people have looked into him, and actually, he's not a credible person at all. They've actually verified who he really is, but she's verified him 4 times, and intuition tells her that
Anybody
that's
that doesn't show their face,
right,
like it
right.
is questionable
But
in my eyes.
yeah, yeah. Well, look, she's on her own journey, and this is the journey that she's on. This is the journey that her soul's pushing her to do, which is, it's her. That's fine. That's fine. I think what I want Mark Richards' docuseries to do is to try to be a docuseries on discernment, right? That's my main aim for it, really. Just because, yes, there's two sides to a story, and some people could say the truth's in the middle somewhere. But when the facts are the facts, they're the facts, right? And if we want to go against court testimony, then it really is a sad day. Then that I even interviewed the retired district attorney, Ed Barbarian. He came on, and he's in the docuseries as well. And for people, or for anyone that doesn't want to believe Ed's, who put Mark away at the time in between 1982 and 1984 when the case was running, right? To say that he's, doesn't know, is not telling the truth, or he cannot be believed. They live in a different reality to that. Yeah, their reality is the reality that it actually was. What happened. These are the facts, and yeah, I think it's not just in this field that we're in. I think there's been a lot of people challenging a lot of fields right now, or at least not challenging them, but just there's a lot of discernment taking place. I think there's a lot of truth rising in a sense, and not always in the way that we want, but things are showing themselves, aren't they, in the times that we live in right now? That is for sure.
They are. And I think people are trying to get to the bottom of a lot of things, because I've had some questionable people on my show before, and then the more that I've learned and the more that I've put common sense and critical thinking, the more that those things don't make much sense anymore. But we all have to kind of go through that, and we've all kind of made our mistakes. But I do want to get back to
Sure.
The actual trial part of this, and kind of get the because there was a lot of things, a lot of lies that Mark Richards was really talking about, and he basically brainwashed these two people, Andrews and Hoover, to kind of commit this crime. And Mark Richards was allegedly a contractor that was getting construction jobs for Hoover, but then it kind of came out after the trial that he wasn't even a contractor at all, right?
That's right. I sent you some audio files as well about this in regards to on my journey of interviewing over 23 people, that relate to this case. One was Mark's brother-in-law in 1982, a guy called Joe, and Mark actually stole Joe's contracting license because Mark was ordering some doors or whatever it was, different bits and pieces for his contracting company of his brother-in-law Joe, who was a carpenter and had a contracting license as well at the time. And Mark stole that contracting license, and it came to light for Joe that when he received a phone call from an anonymous they were anonymous at the time until they realized that they were speaking to the right person. A gentleman that called him that he had had some work done by Mark and his band of merry men, and it was below standard. He'd probably damaged the property or damaged whatever he was doing, and Joe's contracting license number was on the invoice that Mark had supplied him, and had been on the invoice for many other people as well. So yes, he stole the contracting license. I mean, in one of the total recalls that Kerry Cassidy did, she talks about Mark having over 100 people working in his construction company. Now, he had about 4 or 5 people working in there, and most of them were youths that were paid about $5 an hour or less, some of them. And these youths had no experience in construction whatsoever.
My name is Joe Morena, and I was Mark Richards' brother-in-law back in the early 80s.
And how did you first meet Mark?
The first recollection I have was at a dinner at who was to be my in-laws' house with Sharon, my girlfriend at the time, and Karen, her twin sister, was dating Mark, and Mark was there for dinner as well.
What was Mark like back then?
He was friendly and sociable and talkative, and he talked about things, and I did not know him, and I was just listening to what he had to say about what he did and what he was doing.
Did he sound like sometimes he was, making things up, like some of the stories he came out with were a little bit over the top?
It took a while for us to determine that, but yes, there was always something he knew about or did that was involving whatever you were talking about.
Did you ever meet Richard Baldwin, the murder victim?
I did see him at one occasion in San Francisco, and it was basically on a 4th of July holiday.
And what happened when you saw Dick and you saw Mark at that house party?
Well, there was 3 of them. There was Dick Baldwin, Mark Richards, and Craig Andrews, and they were at the downstairs room, and there was a bar there, and they were all standing at the bar, and I was over there talking to them. And one thing I noticed were they displayed to me that they were all packing weapons. They had handguns on them, each of them. And I just asked them, what on earth would you need that for? And they just said, you never know when you might need them. And I just thought that was ridiculous, and I walked away.
But that wasn't the last time that you had interactions with Mark?
No.
So tell us what happened. Because Mark, obviously, he now states publicly that he was a building contractor and that he had a large amount of people. There were over 100 people working for Mark as a contractor.
Well, I opened a cabinet shop in around 1980, and while I was doing that, lo and behold, Mark all of a sudden was a contractor, and he had a warehouse down in Santa Fe off of Francisco somewhere, and he and Craig Andrews were partners on doing something in construction. I think they called themselves construction engineers, if I remember the name correctly. And they were, quote, proclaimed builders then, and I had never heard of Mark ever doing work of that nature, but all of a sudden he was doing it.
And then what happened with him stealing your contractor license?
Well, he and Craig were in my shop. They were buying cabinet doors from me, which I could order. And even there was some trouble about the sizes and dimensions. They didn't fully understand exactly what was going on with how the measurements worked. And I had to explain that to them. And I thought, this is not good. And I just told them to make sure they have the dimensions right, because once they're ordered, they're custom ordered and can't be returned. But anyway, they ordered the doors, and they were in my shop looking at things and in the office. And it was shortly after that, Mark had called me and said that he had some trouble with the customer, and some of my paperwork, the receipt I had given him, may have been in that bunch of paperwork that the customer came and took, and they were having a disagreement about whatever work Mark was doing, and he thought that my name may come up because they had some of the paperwork that I had given Mark when I sold him those cabinet doors. And I said, the only thing that's on there is my name, not my contractor's license number. And he told me, well, in that case, you have nothing to worry about. And then it was sometime later, I get a call from somebody else asking me if I was Joseph Morena, asking me if I had Joseph's cabinets, and I said yes to both. And he quoted my contractor's license number, and I said yes, that's me. And then he asked if I knew Mark Richards. Well, apparently he had contracted for Mark to do a roofing job on him, and my license numbers was on the contract. And that's when I found out it was true that he was using it. So that's when Mark and I ended any sort of relations, either through being my brother-in-law or the business.
Did you see any sort of mental change over the years with Mark at all, that you can look back and say there was a change, that was something was wrong with Mark?
No, we always thought he was kind of a storyteller and took off on some of these, stories and situations that he had done this or had done that, but there was no real backing or proof that he had actually done any of these things.
When you look back now, he should have been protecting Karen, his wife, and looking after her.
Yes, that's one thing I was very angry about.
Because he didn't do that, did he?
No, it was disregard, and she was just vulnerable to it. She trusted him, and he just went too far with everything that he did, and it left her in jeopardy, and she was left holding the bag after he got arrested, and off to jail he went, and Karen was left with the responsibility of paying the back taxes, the house foreclosure, and everything else.
When you went down to the house, 366 Butterfield Road, and if Mark was a good builder, the workmanship you saw at that house, because they were extending it for other people to live there, like Crossy and Andrew.
It was substandard. It wasn't even to code. It was not good. And had there been any sort of permit drawn, if an inspector had been out there to see it, I'm sure it would have been red tagged.
So when Mark's saying that he's got, he had hundreds of people working for him in different crews, that is not true.
I never knew of him to have other than a few kids working for him, and those were the kids at Crossy Hoover and a couple of others that were involved working with, I believe, he and Craig Andrews. And I don't know of any more people than that.
You're sat here with me now, and I'm so grateful of you being sat here. You know I am deep down. You know I am, Ryder. And to be here now, talking with us, this production team, and knowing what's going on in the background with Mark's wife, Joanne Richards, with Mark and his, working for the intelligence services, the secret space program and all this. I mean, and he cannot even come to terms that he did the murder still.
Well, I don't know about him not coming to terms with doing the murder or anything like that. It just tells me what you're explaining, and looking back at Mark's quote fantasies or whatever. I mean, he was creative in terms of wanting to write and do that sort of type of work, and it just somehow his writings crossed over to his real life, and he wanted to carry them out, I believe.
I mean, in one of the bits of audio I sent you with a guy called Keith Andrews, who I managed to track down, who talked about his time with Mark. Actually, Keith Andrews was the guy that called the cops in the end. That, or one of the many people probably, that he suspected that a murder had taken place, because Crossy Hoover was obviously not in a great state at the time after he did the murder, and he was loose-lipped and was telling his friends that of the crime that he had committed.
He was my neighbor when I was growing up, and later on when I was in college, I worked for him for his construction company.
So he was your neighbor while you was growing up. What was that like to have him as a neighbor? Was it just a sort of normal relationship?
Yeah, he was a kind of a casual friend of my brother's. So he would be somebody that might be by the house sometimes. They worked on cars together. He wasn't someone I saw all that much, but he was someone who was welcome in our house.
And what was it like working for Mark? How many construction crews did he have working for him?
As far as I knew, 2. And Gary and I were one crew, and then Crossy, and I don't remember the other guy's name, were the other crew.
Did you ever meet the other crew much?
Yeah, they would come by. Sometimes they would help us on the job that we were working on, and sometimes, and we would see them sometimes at Mark's house if we were meeting before or after work to pick up supplies or talk about plans for what we were going to do on the job site. So that's about the only interactions I had with them, was work related, with the exception that I mentioned earlier about going out on the boat. Then I had spent some time with them, but other than that, I didn't really interact with them that much.
What was Crossy like?
Quiet, reserved.
What was Andrew like?
Kind of extroverted, I would say. Friendly. I don't really have much of a recollection of him. Other than that, he just seemed friendly.
The jobs that Mark was doing with the construction company, would you say he knew what he was doing, that he was a good builder himself?
Um, I think he was a good salesman. I don't know that he was a good builder. And Gary and I were both relatively inexperienced doing this. I had done some work for my brother. Most of the work that I had done had been sheetrock, so finishing work. So I knew sort of how to piece sheetrock together, do the mudding and taping, do the finishing work on the walls. I kind of knew how to do that because my brother had taught me. So that if I was working for my brother, that's usually what he would have me do. With Mark, he just would sort of say, you know, you have to figure it out. And he didn't have plans. You know, typically my brother would have a plan. They'd have some kind of drawing, so at least you'd have an idea. Mark didn't have any. He didn't seem organized in that way.
What was Mark like to work with then?
Mark is a very affable person, or he was then. He's very charming. You know, I wouldn't have characterized or described him that way now, but now, being that I'm better educated and more seasoned, I think he is superficially charming. And he's the sort of person that can walk into a room and sort of command a presence. He's interesting. He will give you all of his attention if you're talking to him. Those are the things that I remember. I thought he was a pretty nice person. However, that sort of superficiality became more obvious the more you got to know him. His superficial charm became more obvious. It became more obvious that it was superficial the more you got to know him. So that made me a little bit sort of uneasy. He's not someone I would think I would, even at whatever I was, 20 or 22, whatever I was, he's not someone I was very close to, and not someone who I would have been very close to.
So the murder happened on July 6, 1982. And in that week before the body surfaced, you had gone on Mark's boat. Just tell us about that.
So it was Crossy and Andrew and Mark came to the job site where Gary and I were working and asked if we wanted to go out on Mark's new boat that he had purchased. It wasn't a brand new boat. It was a secondhand boat that he had bought from someone in Mill Valley, I think. And I don't remember whether we had to go and pick up the boat or whether he already had it hitched to the truck, but it was sort of like, oh, we're just going to go out after work and have a couple of beers on his boat. So I don't recall where we launched it from. I just don't have a memory of what marina we went to, but we went out on the boat. We went out to, I'm going to say it wrong. It's the Sisters or Brothers Islands. And we circled around one or both of the islands and then came back in maybe an hour and a half later. It was really pretty uneventful.
But when you look back now, knowing that that's where the body was, where it washed up, and that's where it was dumped near, what do you now look back on that?
Well, the way that this evolved for Gary and I explained to you earlier that we had found them with this safe, and we saw them with all these things that all these purchases that they had made. They had obviously come into money. So I think Gary, because he had known these two guys from when he was growing up, and I think he might have known Crossy a little bit better, but you'd have to ask Gary. I think that he was either bragging about having killed somebody or something. He for some reason he told Gary that they had disposed of a body in that area where we had gone.
Crossy did.
Crossy told Gary that. And so Gary told me after Crossy and Andrew were gone, and Gary and we were thinking, is he just making this up? I mean, sounds awfully fanciful, but is it possible? Because then we started thinking, well, in the last couple of weeks, they came in all this money. They had this bag of weed. They had the safe, and it just all kind of fell into place. And then they're talking about having dumped this body in this place that we just had gone to the other day. So Gary and I were like, I think they were looking to see if the body was floating or whether there were any remains when we went out to because we went to exactly the spot where Crossy had bragged that they had dumped it.
So tell me about the safe. You went to Mark's house at Butterfield Road, and who was drilling the safe?
As I remember, the three of them were standing around the safe. The safe was sitting on the garage floor where our supplies were. So we had to go into the garage and they were standing around the safe. I don't remember who was holding the drill, but they were all there.
Mark, Crossan, and Andrew.
Yes.
Around the safe. The safe was being drilled, and when that was being drilled, you thought...
We asked them where it came from because they had told us that they were working on a job in Terra Linda, and they said, well, we removed this safe from the guy's house. He didn't want it after we were finished with the remodel job. So I didn't argue with them or discuss it. But when Gary and I left, we said, well, if the guy had the safe in his house, why didn't they have the combination? It doesn't make any sense. So that on top of the preceding week or two where they'd had all this come into all this money, that's when we started thinking. At that point, Gary and I thought they were burglarizing people's homes. That's what we thought they were doing. Well, so Gary and I were talking about this after he found out, after they were bragging about having dumped this body. Crossy was bragging to Gary. And Gary and I were talking about it after work, and then we went home and I was talking about it to my friend. And I thought, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to a detective. I'm going to let them know, at the very least, I think these guys are burglars, but this is much more serious and they may have dumped a body out there. So they wouldn't allow me to speak to, I remember calling, they wouldn't let me talk to a detective. And so they said, you have to talk to a patrol officer. And I said, well, I don't know that the patrol officer is going to even have knowledge about this, but that's fine. I'll talk to the patrol officer. So I told the whole story to him. And then he said, hold on a second. And he got Keaton. And Keaton came on the phone. And then it turned out, and I remember Keaton telling me this, we just pulled a body out of the bay today. And we pulled it out just where you said it was coming from. So then I thought, oh, well, then now they think I dumped it. And I'm trying to rat these guys out. That's what would go through my mind if somebody was telling me that, and I'm a cop. So that was the reason that I called the cop. It was just, if it was true, then they need to answer for their crime.
Did you ever speak to Mark since that time of making that phone call?
No.
Did you ever speak to Crossy from that time of making that phone call, or Andrew? How did you feel when you realized what had happened, when it all came to light?
I was terrified because I thought, well, they know that I know. And now I'm the rat, now I'm the snitch. So I was very nervous, and the police didn't want me to do anything differently. They wanted me to continue going to work as if nothing had happened. And they said, if he offers you to go out on his boat again, don't go. If he asks you to come to his house, aside from picking up supplies, don't go. And we'll have somebody, at the job site.
So the cops were building up a picture way before they arrested them. They knew what was going on.
They had a body, and I don't know whether they linked the body to him. I have no idea. All I know is that when I told them where the body was, they said that they had just found a body that day in that exact location.
Keith actually made the phone call to the detective that took it, was Ted Lindquist, and the body had just appeared. Mr. Bowen's body had just floated up in the San Pablo Bay area in San Francisco, just on the same day when Keith made the phone call. So he had no construction business. Well, he did, but it was. There were so many bad jobs. I remember when I was interviewing Cross and Hoover, one bad job that he did was for a family called the Clients, where he basically took out essential support for the house, and it cost them more money to get it fixed than it did to for the simple construction job that they were doing. So yeah, I mean, Mark lied about everything. But the most damning piece of evidence for Mark Richards.
So before you get onto that, how did it? Because it's important to build the story here a little bit. How did Hoover get hooked up with Mark in the first place? Because from my understanding, the way it all worked was through two recruiters working for Mark, individuals. I think it was Pete Neal and Willie Rubble.
That's right.
Robles or something.
That's right.
Were working for Mark as recruiters in this Pendragon LARP cult. Right, because that's a part of the story that I did not know about. And whenever I was researching it more, it turns out that these Captain Mark Richards, his people that he hired, basically murder for hire to do this murder for him, were all a part of this Pendragon.
That's right.
LARP cult.
That's right. There were many boys in that cult as well. So yes, Willie Robles knew of Crossing Hoover, and Willie Robles had been approached by Mark to do the murder for him for Richard Baldwin. At that point, Willie realized that he just wanted to get out, join the Navy, and get the hell out. He had had enough. So he actually, when he was asked to recruit for more people, he actually recruited Crossing Hoover, and Crossing Hoover was a damaged individual at that time. Angry, he was a fighter. He was unhinged at 17, and Mark got into his head. Mark manipulated Crossy just like he manipulates Joanne Richards right now and anyone else that believes him. Mark was able to get into Crossing Hoover's head and dig into the worst parts that Crossing hated. Crossing hated, as he would term them, I don't term them anything. He hated homosexuals. He hated pedophiles. There was a few things that he despised, and Mark used those aspects that he despised and put them into Richard Baldwin. So Richard Baldwin became the pedo, Richard Baldwin became the Nazi, Richard Baldwin became the homosexual, and he was none of these things, right? And a plan was...
Is there any proof that Mr. Baldwin was any of these things?
No. I interviewed
Mark
his friends.
Richards claims?
No, not at all. No, I interviewed his friends. He may have been classed as asexual, but he was not a pedophile. And as the cop said to me, and a few of them said to me, do you not think that in discovery of the individual of Richard Baldwin, and also the discovery of when it goes to court, that none of this anything here would have been brought up? Of course it would have been. If Joanne Richards has been going around promoting that Richard Baldwin was a pedophile and he was making child porn and he was a bad guy. Well, the only person that's told you that, Joanne, is Mark Richards, and you've done no fact checking yourself. I've interviewed Tom Mills, a good friend of Richard Baldwin, and it's just he's disgusted by it, but it's just not true. Dick Baldwin was none of those things. And he used all those things to get Crossy enraged, so that even on the day of the murder, when Mark, Crossy, and Andrew were at Mr. Baldwin's house working on some construction for Mr. Baldwin, and it was obviously prior to the construction, he had told the boys that we're gonna they had agreed to do the murder. And today was the day, basically. So there were little things that were planted on that day. Like, for example, there was a gay magazine that was brought out to give to Crossy from Mr. Baldwin, and which enraged Crossy even more. Hey, look at this Blue Boy magazine. And of course he just, was starting to lose the plot in his head because he just hated stuff like that, right? And because of his lack of immaturity and all sorts of other reasons, right, that Crossy had, right? He's very sorry for he's more than sorry for what he's done, but at 17, Crossy was a different person compared to the man that he is now, right? and there were other things that were done. So what I'm saying to you, there was breadcrumbs laid to enrage Crossy to the point that when they took him down to the garage, well, when Mark took him down to the garage, the signal was given like that, and Mr. Baldwin's life was taken. And what for what? For nothing. But the only reason it was done was for a financial gain, because Mark wanted what was in that safe, which was the pink slips to the insurance company as well. He was going to get his life insurance policy changed. He was going to sell the house. He was going to sell the cars. I mean, Mark wasn't well. When you speak to the next door neighbors, which we have back in the day that lived with him, next to him, they said they saw a mental degradation of Mark over a short amount of time. Mark was not well, obviously. And Mark had set a cult up called Pendragon, but like the cops said to me, they feel that Pendragon was not actually going to take over. Well, no, he had talked about taking over Marin County, but the cops feel that also, if not, it was there as a manipulation as well to just bring a father figure into someone's life that was able to be manipulated, and that's what really hurt Crossy as well. He felt like Mark was a father figure to him because his father was AWOL, and he needed it at that time, and any love that Mark gave him was all just fake. It was all just from Mr. Baldwin.
How soon before the murder did Mark Richards actually suggest to Hoover that he should kill Mr. Baldwin?
I think it was like it had only been working for him for maybe 3 months, so it was sometime within that 3 months, probably getting towards the last month, I would say, because Willie Rose had wouldn't do the murder for him, thank God. But it was a pretty it was a pretty short start. It was like a 3 months, 3 or 4 months of working with Mark, and then this takes place. And Mark never was in the military. He was never in Vietnam. And Joanne will say, yeah, but the people, even his closest friends, never knew about his secret space program work, never knew that he was in the military. Well, we've got a master timeline, and you can't be in multiple places at once. I mean, whatever she's going to say, he was in the spacecrafts and they were taking him instantaneously to all these places. It's just bullshit because, she's married. She's had many military husbands before. One was actually, a couple were in the Navy. She knows she's entitled to military benefits if Mark was in there. She's not claiming none of them because she can't claim them. She claimed on her previous husbands because they were genuine military people. The only genuine military person when it comes to Mark was his father. He's just taken aspects of his father's work as well, and his mentor, which was Marshall Dill, and made this insane story up because he knew. See, the thing is, he's been in so long, Mark has, in the prison system. You become institutionalized, didn't he? I think his brain changed somewhere even greater than it had done when he when you're never going to get out, really, right? I think you break away from reality. And that's exactly what he did. And then he was able to manipulate someone like Joanne, who had come from abusive husband after abusive husband. But of course, Mark Richards is not abusive. Of course he's not. Yeah, he's just, he's fantastic. But, he's a mental manipulator. He's a mental disease within Joanne's mind. And, this is her soul's journey. Now, she may be seeing channelers and they may be telling her that she's doing great work and that, Mark's father's coming through mediums and stuff like that, saying that he really supports it and stuff. You know what? If that's what she's being told, that's what she needs to hear, but it is not true.
Do we have any proof that Mark Richards was there of the killing of Mr. Baldwin? Because from my understanding, the whole case kind of, there was some circumstantial evidence, but the whole case kind of relied upon Hoover's testimony alone that Mark Richards was there and handing him these tools and these knives. And another thing was interesting too was in Hoover's most recent parole hearing, the the commissioner was reading Hoover's charges, and the commissioner falsely states that there was an extra charge for a firearm for having a gun, and then Hoover was like, it wasn't a gun, and then the commissioner kind of rolled back his statements a little bit. So why would the commissioner say that there was a gun involved if there wasn't a gun involved? Do you know why?
Well, I've not seen that actual page where it says there was a gun involved, but I'm sure it's on there, right? Yeah, look, these people are seeing parole cases after parole cases per day, right? And that must have just been a mistake on that. It must have just, of course there was no gun involved. And I'm sure that was corrected in the hearing as well. So, yeah, there is, so it's not just one thing with this case in the forensic link. It's a totality of the forensic link. So, okay, so on the day of the murder, just after they'd murdered Mr. Baldwin, they arrived back at Mr. Baldwin's house. They ransacked the house. They'd left Andrew behind to ransack the house, right? So they get back and they found Mr. Baldwin's safe, his guns, bag of weed, cash in the house, and they basically robbed and took all that stuff. Out of the money they got from the house, they then locate a boat in the local paper. That night, that evening of when they murdered Mr. Baldwin, Crossy and Mark Richards, they all three then go buy a boat. So witness number one places all three buying a boat together. They then go to Mr. Giving a shortcut version. They then later on take the boat with Mark's truck to the garage. They've already pre-wrapped the body up. Crossy and Mark did, and then they Crossy, Mark, and Andrew load the body onto the boat, and they drive to the marina to put the boat in the water to go out to the bay to dump the body. Security guards at the boat complex, and he's another witness that sees all three together at that night putting a boat in the water. When they get into the boat into the water and get out into the bay, the only way to really sink the body in the end, because they couldn't get the body to sink, was to wrap a outboard motor with a chain that was longer than it should have been for them. So what happened is July 13th, around that time, the body with its gases rose to the top because the chain was too long, because the tide had changed that much that had they just had less of chain on there, this body would have disappeared, and it would have been more difficult forensically to link them all. So that's how the body came up, because Captain Mark Richards, as a great Navy captain, made the chain too long, but he was not a captain at all. It's a stolen valor, right? He then spends on Mr. Baldwin's credit card. He just after the murder, he takes a $10,000 loan out in Mr. Baldwin's name and forges Mr. Baldwin's signature. So there's all the shop people that were called in to the hearing, to the court case as well, to verify that that was the man that faked his credentials being Mr. Baldwin when it was actually Mark Richards, and took mega amounts of credit out and brought jewelry for his wife and electronics and all sorts of stuff, right? He went on a massive spending spree, right? Then he had...
But the deep state framed him, and the deep state told him to do...
Of course they did.
Take out the...
Of course they did.
Take out the loan and spend the credit cards and raid his house.
Well,
and,
it's actually better than that.
It's
actually better than that. Actually, it's easier than that. Joanne Richards says that's how the boys would have traded stuff. The boys traded stuff like equipment, and the boys traded, as in Baldwin, the boy, and Mark Richards, money by using, Dick would give him his credit card quite often. Well, anyone that knew Dick knew that, one, he never lent his tools out, and two, he would never give his checkbook out. He never did that kind of stuff, right? So then another witness was Craig Andrew, which was Mark Richards' ex-business partner, who arrived at Mark's house, whatever this is on the timeline, right before they all get busted, and Mark had punched out Mr. Baldwin's safe. Now, when Craig got there, they all told him, Mark, Andrew, and Crossy did, that we found this safe and just a bunch of pink slips and stuff, and that's just what we do. We just breaking into a safe. On the day that they were arrested, Mark had loaded his van. His truck, with anything that he had of Mr. Baldwin's property in his house, and any connections to the wrappings of the body. So he had all the coaxial cable that they wrapped the body with, or the plastic sheeting, and the duct tape. As they're coming out of Richard's home, Baldwin, Crossy, and Andrew, they get arrested. They were on their way to the dump to dispose of all this forensically linked evidence. And forensically, the duct tape did link back to the duct tape that was on the body. There was also some blood splatter that was on the boat as well. And Cross and Hoover's bloody hand mark was on one of Mr. Baldwin's classic cars as well, and of course there was lots of blood there still from the murder, probably dried, but there was. You could say there wasn't much to link Mark being at the garage, but Andrew Campbell is the one that got state testimony, so he became the star witness, and for his statements, he was given immunity from being prosecuted. Right, he should have gone to prison. Right, even though he wasn't there at the murder, he did dispose of the body with Mark. Also, the gun owner store, there was a gun store, and the owner of the gun store also was part of the court case as well, because he accepted the guns from Mark that were Richard Baldwin's guns. There were many, many things that linked it all back together, right? There was over 21,000 pieces of evidence that were put into this case when it was presented to court as well. And
so you've spoken to with Andrew.
I've spoken to Andrew. Yes, it took me a long time to find him.
And he claims that
he
that
gave the
Mark
same story.
Was there.
He gave the same. Everyone I spoke to gave the same story. And obviously Andrew told me how much this has destroyed his life, and the issues that he'd gone through growing up with having done this, and how much he hated Mark for what he had done. And he felt more sorry for Crossy, but obviously my heart is with Mr. Baldwin. Do you know what I mean? He did get civilly prosecuted by Susan Baldwin, Mr. Baldwin's mother, and a lot of them got civilly prosecuted as well. She went after them in civil cases. I don't think she won all of them, but she did go after them. I've got the civil cases as well. They're really interesting. So it was Mark's police interview that sealed it for him as well. His police interview, he eventually, after trying to manipulate the cops, hours later, he admits to disposing of the body, trying to cover up the murder. He never admitted to being there, but he was a liar from day one. He's always been a liar. He's unable to tell the truth. He's not been able to heal from this. I don't feel he has, because he's never been able to admit what he did to his good friend Richard Baldwin. And to this day, he claims he wasn't there at the garage, but of course he was. I do believe Cross and Hoover. The one thing that Cross has always been, and I think he's had this on his side since day one, is he's always told the truth. And there's just too much.
But you don't think that there's was because when he was 17 years old, right?
Yep, they were both.
He was very, very young, and it's no doubt that Mark Richards was the mastermind
absolutely
behind this whole thing. But I'm really not 100% sold on the fact that he was actually there during the murder. There's quite a few conflicting, statements. And, when you look at Hoover being as young as he was, he could have indeed made up the story that, Mark was there during the
Well,
murder to try and
don't forget.
shuffle blame on the Mark Foley. Because I mean, if you're 17 years old, Kevin,
Well,
and you're basically mind controlled to basically do a murder for hire, instance, how could you prove that it was actually him that was the mastermind? Well, you would say that, he was there, whether he was actually there or not, just like with the Manson killings, right? The followers said that Manson visited the house after the murders, but I don't think that there was actually any proof that Manson was actually there the night of the murders.
You have to then understand the framework of Mark's mind. For him to say that he was off planet when the murders took place, for him to say he was part of the secret space program, for him to then change his story and say he was having tea with his mum, for a man to say that he was off planet, that says everything. Because one, he wasn't, and two, he's insane, and three, yes, he was there with Crossy. When I've interviewed Crossy, up to this day, and it was Andrew that was the missing piece for me a little bit, because I just wanted to just double check, will this man, after all these years, what was he going to say? And he didn't know I was turning up, in a sense, right? And his story matched completely, and I just didn't need any more than that in the end. If Mark wasn't there at the garage, well, where was he? He wasn't having tea with his mum and dad, I can assure you that. And he would had to have been there to have coaxed Crossy to the end, to have pushed Crossy to the end. There's no way a 17-year-old boy is going to take a man that's 39, who's going to show him his classic car shop, and the car's down there. There's no way that he's going to go down there and murder a man on his own. Crossy was pushed all the way to the end to do this, and he did. And then if okay, say he wasn't there, but he wasn't off planet, and if someone's going to say they're off planet, and when you read the police interview, how manipulative this bastard was to the police, and they saw right through him. Nah. And then you've got all the forensic. Why did he dispose of the body? Why did he go on a spending spree? Why did he not report the boys when he knew that they had done the murder? If they had confided in him and that he'd done the murder, the worst thing to do would be to cover it up, regardless of what excuse you've got. He should have gone to the officials. He didn't. He was on the way to the dump to cover it all up. That's how much it meant to him. And he now says he was a captain, and he never even served in the military. When you speak to his ex-wife, she's like, he hated Vietnam. The whole idea of it. He hated the military, but he was going to join the cops. And he did go to criminal. He was attending a criminal class when he was arrested in that class in the late 70s for insurance fraud, because he was taking cars and writing them off as though they'd been destroyed, stolen, and he got busted for that in an insurance ring as well. So he never had a clean slate from the beginning. And Mark wasn't right in the head. He was not right in the head when you speak to his friends. And
then it makes sense how he was able to create all of these, extraordinary claims about space and, time travel and fighting alien space wars, and that he wasn't on the planet from, being in this LARP cult, as well. And then it was also stated that he was a science fiction writer, and he would collaborate with other people in prison on science fiction novels, right? He would write something, and then another inmate would give him some kind of feedback, and then he would give the other inmate feedback on their work, and so on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, yes, that did. He was doing that, and and still does. Look, to get life without the possibility of parole, and to have been in there for 40 years, I can't imagine that. Right, I can't imagine that. But then again, you've got to think of the victim. I met Susan Baldwin. She wakes up every day, and still can't. It's still difficult for her. That group took her brother for what? For a bit of money. It was worth murdering him for a bit of money. And she doesn't want any of them to get out. for what they did to her brother. I think if it was me though, I
And then
would.
Hoover stated that he didn't get any of the money after the killing,
No,
right?
well, that's what
Mark
that's
Richards
that,
never
that, that
gave him
that's
any
what
of the money.
pissed him off even more.
Yeah.
That's why he sang like a bird. He realized that Mark was insane. He realized it, but then again, he was insane for doing what he had done at the time. But yeah, Mark was never going to keep. Mark had double crossed him as well. Yeah, I think if it was my relative, I would like to think that I could forgive, and that I could give someone a second chance. But Susan's just not at that space. I've met her. She's just, it really messed up her life in some ways. And I'm not saying that she's not gone on to live a beautiful life, but I mean, she never got to share her brother's life with her, or any family that he could have had, or. But I know it. When you read the parole hearings, and I've got all of them. I sent you the latest one. She talks about in those paroles what it did to her, what it did to her mum. It just, it's just, and the devastating consequences for all the friends that no one will ever know about that he had, and murder happens all the time, and this is a story of the consequences of it as well, and then he's got someone like Joanne Richards who's just gone out on internationally and across the parts of the states to promote his work, and it's all a lie. And none of it's true, and he got the Pendragon in the end. He got he wanted a following, and he's got it. Or he had it.
Yeah, it's really interesting how closely this story is so familiar to because I mentioned the Charles Manson,
Yes.
story
Yes.
earlier, even down to the details of
Mm.
this Captain Mark Richards story. Manson brainwashing his cult of followers to commit murder. Getting into prison, having all of these
Yeah.
philosophical stories about
Well,
corruption and
he's
the
worked-
system. Sounds almost identical to Captain Mark Richards, but with ETs and secret space programs.
But the inmates, that because he runs the vets program, or the PSD program, the vets program, they all believe that they all believe him, that he's served, and and it's like, wow, he's still got that ability to. Well, even the cops said that to me. He's got a certain charm about him. He just, he's able to manipulate. He's able to be a chameleon. He's just whatever you are, he becomes. If you started writing to him, you would see the chameleon. You would see that take place. Oh, I've done that. Oh, yeah, I know about that. Do you know what I mean? And he doesn't at all. It's the way. It's what he enjoys doing. And all I've done on this docuseries is just fight Joanne Richards. She thinks I'm working for a 3-letter agency. I said, do you know how ridiculous that sounds? I mean, you can say those words, and I can't really prove that I'm not, but I'm not. I mean, that's just so stupid for you to think that. But if that's what you want to think, that's what you want to think. I mean, but he how much is he? Well, I said to her, he's abused her. Through mental manipulation.
Are you still in contact with her? Or do you talk to her through email at all?
Yeah,
anymore?
yeah. We are, because obviously she's set up a non-for-profit as well, called Earth Defense Headquarters, and we've asked her for a number of we've asked her we've sent so many questions to her. We only found out recently that she admitted that she's actually never applied as the wife of Mark Richards for his DD 214 from the National Archives, and because she would be entitled to get a copy of it. She's never actually done it. I said, well, I have, and it always comes back with nothing. I've applied to the Navy. I've applied everywhere. There's no record of this man. There's nothing.
Are we for sure that Mark Richards is his real name?
Well, I've got his birth certificate, and he has no middle
Okay.
name, so yeah, that's definitely his name. I mean, she's got his.
I was just wondering because maybe it was you couldn't have found something because he was going by a completely different name.
No, you can't do
know?
that. You can't do that. Missions are classified. People are not when it comes to the services. So and for him to say, but she'll say, well, in the Narn records, there was a fire at the record center back in the day. Well, we spoke to the record center about that, and actually none of the Vietnam files for his age group were affected, and they're not classified. Nothing is classified. Missions are classified. People are not. So and again with the non-for-profit that she's got, she's opened a research center at the house for the EDHQ. She's not provided a mission statement nor meetings. She uses her house as a research center, but which hasn't been assessed for taxes. She's living in Portland, but she's got this research center in Marin County, and we've asked her for the her paperwork for the non-for-profit, and she's refusing to give it. So I don't know what she's got to hide.
Yes, it's very, very interesting, and whenever you put all the pieces together, it really starts coming together for you, and you see that this whole thing was a huge fraud. But speaking of three-letter agencies,
yes.
Kevin, a lot of people have connected the Manson stories to the CIA, and that the Manson cult was a CIA experiment. So I guess my question to you is, what's the possibilities of this Mark Richards saga or story being any way, shape, or form connected to the CIA and any kind of three-letter agencies? Was there any kind of media press coverage of this event back in
Yes, there
1982?
There was, and it's really difficult to get that footage because most of the news networks' libraries in that day are in such disarray that they want to charge you, like 2,000. Just to for a couple of hours work just to see if they can even get close to the time range that we're after, and God knows how much it would cost to really get the footage as well, right? So we continue to try that. We may have found some radio broadcast of it, and we're just looking at that aspect as well. But when it comes to CIA or three-letter agencies, well, the only one that would come to mind is Project Camelot for its continuous output of disinformation. If there was anything connected to that side of it, I would say it's got to be Project Camelot, because when you get someone like me that comes to you with all the evidence and you refuse to want to talk about it, you just refuse, point blank, then there may be no three-letter agency, and it may just be someone that's wacko jacko and is unable to discern. And that's all it is, that created a big platform for themselves. But then again, it is very strange.
Well, a lot of people, they don't want to go back on their previous statements because then that makes them look not credible anymore.
It could be that. Could be that.
That's I think that has something to do with it on her end, for not wanting to look at the evidence that you provide and basically just disregarding everything and saying that it was all the deep state and it was all planned to put him in prison because he had all this crazy information about the secret space program and aliens and all that. But if she were to go back on it, then I feel that she thinks that it would make her look Looney Tunes for believing this story of this gentleman that was involved in this murder, and it wasn't a cover-up, it wasn't planned by the deep state. And but honestly, it makes you look like a better journalist when you do that. Whenever you're able to come out and admit that you're wrong, it actually adds credibility to you, and should add credibility to your viewership. Your audience should appreciate that.
Absolutely. I so agree with you. Yeah, it would do just that. And there's so much we've missed out, and I know that time's not on our side and everything else, right? Because I barely feel we scratched the surface, but it's not an easy one to talk about, this one, because as you say, and I know I've used this word before, there's so many layers to it. there's just so many layers to it, right? Because you've got the murder, then you've got how he became what he became, then you've got his family history, and then you've got to debunk all that he said, and then you've got Joanne mixed in there as well with, oh my God, it's just, but it's definitely, I hope this documentary comes together, and I think it's going to be different to what people even perceive of even what we're talking about here. I think it's going to look different very different on film compared to just the way that we're describing the events right now, because that's what I want to do with it. I want to make it different, and it's not going to be just a normal docu-series. It's going to be a little bit different. So
Absolutely. And when can we expect this
Yes,
docu-series to hit,
oh
Kevin?
my God, I cannot wait, Ryder, to have this done. Honestly, but it's September 2023 when it's coming out. We've decided now. We've decided September 2023. It is released. That's our release date now. We're not changing it. It's not going to be any sooner. It's not going to be any later. It is September 2023. So there's a lot to do right now. I mean, you can imagine going through all of Joanne Richards' interviews and, and all the, there's just a lot. There's a lot, man. And yeah.
It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. It's
Every
difficult
day,
to
Christmas
do-
Day,
to-
I'll be doing it. Easter, I'll be doing it. I can't wait. Do you know what I mean? So
Awesome.
yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on, Kevin. I really appreciate you, brother. Where can people find you online if they would like to watch more of your content, or where they can also support you as well?
Well, Ryder, just thank you so much for having us on. I really do mean that as well. And thank you for taking the time as well to do the research. And I really do appreciate that. And I hope I've done it justice as well. So if people want to find me, just go onto YouTube, just type in The More Show, or just type in the International Spiritual News Network. But if you just type in The More Show, you'll see all my links on there. And that's probably the best way to get me right now. So thank you so much for inviting me on.
Thank you. All the links to Kevin's information will be in the description of this video. Go over there and support him. Subscribe to his channel. He puts out really good work over there. So for everyone else, thanks for watching and listening. Much love to everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button, help the channel out in the YouTube algorithm, share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. The link to my channel on ROKFIN is in the description. Sign up over there, hit the follow button for my premium content. And you can catch this episode and any of my other episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and download them individually directly to your device for free on Spreaker.com. Again, thanks so much for coming on, Kevin. I appreciate you, my friend, for sharing this information, this very convoluted secret space program meets true crime investigation work that you've done. Thank you.